Welcome everybody to the 2021 K-State Garden Hour series. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you're a regular, we're so glad to have you back. We started this webinar in 2020 as a way to share extension gardening education during COVID, and we've had so much success that we've decided to continue it into 2021. This webinar is hosted by K-State Research and Extension. My name is Ariel Whiteley-Knoll, and I am the Horticulture Agent for K-State Research and Extension in Shawnee County. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticulture education or a related discipline, but most of all, we each have a love for educating and sharing really important gardening topics. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. Please make sure that you're using the Q&A feature for questions related to the presentation. This is where we're going to look for questions when we go into our Q&A session. You should see a button along the bottom tab that says Q&A. Just click on that and then you can put your question in and we'll answer it at the end. Our moderators today are Dennis, Lauren, and Brooke. They'll be sharing information through the chat during the presentation, and then they're also going to help us with the Q&A portion of the webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will post it to our K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to each topic as well. If we share links through the chat, we will also link them on the website. Our website is also where you're going to have access to all the previous topics and the upcoming topics in the 2021 series. And our moderators are going to send that website over the chat. Make sure that you snap a photo of how you're watching this webinar, like and share, and then use the hashtag K-State Garden Hour to help us to promote the program. Today's topic is going to be effective irrigation. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, Gregg Eyestone, who is the Riley County Extension Agent. Please give us a few moments while we transition and share the presentation slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And kind of an appropriate situation here. This is my office building where I'm from today. And I don't know if you can hear some in the background. They are actually power washing our building. So some of that background noise may come and go and change as we go through the program today. I want to thank you again for coming. We're going to talk about, I think, hopefully supplemental moisture. We get, most part of the state gets quite a bit of natural rainfall. And so occasionally we need to add some extra moisture to keep our plants growing healthy. And this is one of our grand challenges in extension is water. And so I kind of have our icon here. So I want to make sure that we have ample amount of water along with good quality water. And you can find a lot of information at our Kansas Healthy Yards and Communities website, which I'll talk about shortly. It is a limited resource, fresh water, for our use for ourselves and for our plant materials. And so we want to make sure we're have enough for us as well as using it appropriately. And oftentimes in some of our irrigation practices, we may be using more than we need to. And so we're going to talk about that mainly today. I had the opportunity of working in Kansas City as a property manager for one summer, and property manager meaning maintaining the landscapes. It eventually quickly turned into a irrigation repair service. And so I don't have a real affinity for in-ground systems because I spend a lot of time trying to make them work. But all these systems can do a good job for our health of our plants as long as they're maintained and we can use them properly. I think this is our why of why we want to make sure we're using water correctly, is so that we are able to have clean and abundant water for our consumption along with our pets and our landscapes as well. So just focus on having quality water. A couple situations that I find interesting before we start off on our path down the irrigation path. Kind of an interesting situation here. I think we have over here in the right-hand corner, the artificial turf on the soil. So it's a playing field that can be utilized even during rain events, but it does require some water. They can irrigate this to cool the turf as well as do some cleaning of that is required. Here up in the old stands, we have a green roof, if you will, And so it's kind of interesting that we have artificial plants down on the ground, but we put plants up onto the artificial area. Not a very deep soil there. So if you see this is irrigated to keep those plants growing when required. Another situation here with a tree that I think is fairly well established. And do we need to continue to provide water for that or not? But the situation I came across is it still has its drip line so that it could be irrigated, but I think this is becoming a girdling drip line maybe in the future. And so maybe need maintained again to see if that's still necessary or at least move it so that it doesn't cause problems down the road. Another situation here in my community, we have many planter boxes along our downtown area in our Aggieville. And interesting situation, I think, is that these planters, although they probably need some irrigation, we have 10 pop-up spray heads here being put in. And this bed is probably about 30 square feet. And so not a large area and has lots of irrigation capabilities. And then there's this situation. This verbena has to struggle and make it on its own here in Kansas. And I think it does a wonderful job. And so there's all these situations of either just natural rainfall and or providing some irrigation systems for those times when we may need them. This was kind of just an appropriate time that came across two situations this week. One was over here in the right-hand corner is a planter box, again, our downtown area. But hopefully you can see that there's some standing water in that, unfortunately. And so those plants may be limited time frame of survival. And I will confess, this is a hanging basket that we purchased and have at home. And my wife went on vacation and I stayed home. But she watered it really well before she left. And it looks like it needs watered. But if you stick your finger in that container, you would know that that potting media is quite moist. And unfortunately, when plants are overwatered, there's no real capability of it coming back. If that was just wilting from drought stress, I've seen several times being able to add the water will go ahead and perk that plant back up. So again, I think maybe a mindset of switching from when do I water to the time frame of when don't I water so I don't cause plant injury, maybe where we're approaching as we get more sophisticated in life, more irrigation systems out there. So since we talked about containers, it's my only slide on containers, and Travis Carmichael did a great job on container gardening and raised beds a few Garden Hour webinars back, so check those out if you need to. Containers, as long as they have some holes in the bottom to allow that excess water to drain through, they can dry out a little bit quicker than other gardening ways. And we just want to make sure that you stick your finger in there to see if it needs some moisture and add enough water so that a little bit drains out of those openings in the bottom of your container. So watering a container should be pretty straightforward and I think easier than it would be our in-ground type of plants to maintain watering. So I think this is maybe our goal, or at least it's my goal, to have an attractive landscape and one that has healthy plants in it. We're just going to assume that we have all the other ones in the back, the vegetable garden, the fruit garden, and all the other type of plants that we like to grow in our landscapes. But to accomplish this, plants need lots of things. So I like to use this acronym, PLANTS, kind of easy to remember. The P will stand for place. All our plants need the proper place to grow and enough space to grow. We're going to be concentrating on liquid, which would be the water. Plants need air to take the carbon dioxide out of the air and utilize that, but they also need to have oxygen in the soil for roots to be healthy. Nutrients, whether it's soil or adding fertilizer, along with proper temperatures for growth. And of course, plants need light or sunlight for the process. So we're talking liquid here in particular, and so it is important. Our plants are 90% liquid, so we do know that plants need it. That liquid's going to dissolve and carry those nutrients, that is in our acronym. It keeps the plant turgid, and so if it is lacking water, it will look wilted. Again, you just need to check to make sure that it does need water and not have an abundance. We'll keep the plants cool in the hot weather, and so sometimes we need to water a little bit more when it's hotter out. And it is needed, of course, for photosynthesis as well. So we obviously know liquid is important. It's just having the right amount for good plant health. So if we have too much liquid, you're going to suppress the release of the carbon dioxide out of the soil. So the oxygen cannot be taken in, and we're going to have problems with that root health. And eventually, if the roots die, then of course the rest of the plant's going to be dying as well. KansasHealthyYards.org is a website that we maintain and have some information there for you. So on water saving irrigation techniques, you can seek that out after the webinar and get some more information. So kind of an overview of what we may talk about, some in more depth than others, is we're going to be talking about watering to the root depth, using a probe or your finger or some way to determine some of that. I still think a great rule of thumb is 1 inch of water to 1.5 per week. So if you happen to get called away, lose some interest, or fall asleep, some of these things that have happened to me during some of these Zoom programs, not the Kansas Garden Hour, but other ones, you know, this is the kind of maybe a take-home message to really have with you, is that inch a week will probably maintain most all your plants in perfect health. We will talk about watering when and water according to the plant needs. If you want to do a little more scientific method of doing that, we'll talk about the evaporation from the soil, as well as the transpiration, the water pushed through the plant and released through the leaves. Talk a little bit about measuring the output of our sprinkler so we get even coverage, along with many of us may have a clay or a tight soil, and it doesn't allow for water to infiltrate it very easily. And so we have to turn our irrigation on and off so that we can get that water down into the soil for the plants. So when you're young, you may have a fascination with irrigating and do some watering, but hopefully as you mature, get more information, you're not like this guy who's doing two things, I'm told. Chuck Mars, one of our retired professors that did a great job on educating us. So his comment on a slide like this is he's wasting water along with cooling his thumb. And so those may be somewhat important aspects of your life, but usually if we're watering plants, this is not an appropriate way of taking care of that situation. So knowing is not enough. We must apply that information that we have, and wishing is not enough. We must do. So want to suggest or motivate us to go ahead and take the knowledge that we gain and then to apply that if we can. I was on another webinar Utah State Extension had that was on water, and this was one of their campaigns, wait to water. So they were suggesting not to water their lawn, let nature take care of itself till after Mother Nature, so that those plant roots can get a little bit sturdier, healthier, aggressive to go out and earn its water use instead of spoon feeding it or babying it, or however you want to make that comment there. So again, a kind of a focus is that we have healthy plants, which will hopefully be attractive and pleasing and fulfill our desires and needs for our plant material. Another retired horticultural specialist, Dr. Alan Stevens, this is what he would instruct us. If you can grow the roots, the top will take care of itself. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the roots of our plants. The roots are the ones that take up the water and the nutrients. So there's a book out there, Understanding Roots. I got this from our library at one time, back when books were popular and libraries had them. I guess I was the only one who checked this book out because they no longer have it in their circulation. But the information in here really is kind of old stuff, I guess. A lot of it was research done back in the 20s, and that would be the 1920s, not the 2020s. And so we've known for 100 years a little bit more about what roots do, where they grow, how they grow. But maybe we forgot it over time, or just thought of different ways that plants might function. But so there's information in there on roots, which would be a good reference if you come across that to investigate. So I grew up in the 70s, had some horticulture programs, training, and I think Dennis Patton mentioned this in one of his presentations, that, you know, we thought maybe that the top was the mirror image of the bottom, and that roots looked exactly the same. So that was kind of some information shared to me in the 70s. But if you go back to the 1920s, this is the information that they found out and is still relevant. And so root systems, you know, they're going to really go where they need to go to make that plant healthy and get on with its life. And so roots really extend much farther than we may think, and not necessarily as deep as we think at times as well. So in this illustration, you know, this particular tree may have roots extending out. So oftentimes I go to homeowners and they're talking about their trees, and I say, well, you know, your tree roots are probably in your neighbor's yard as well. So we need to be cautious on how we manage our lawns and situations like that. So just a reference point that, you know, roots may be everywhere. You've probably seen diagrams like this of some of our more native plants and their root systems and how deep they may go. But plants have also learned to cope with their environment, or have been already adapted to it. So in this right-hand side, you know, Kentucky bluegrass doesn't have a very deep root system. And so watering requirements are going to be a little bit different on that, but it also has the capability of going dormant when drought periods come. And so, you know, we talk about bluegrass being a very water requiring plant. It is if you're wanting to keep it green in the summertime, but it has the capability of going dormant and surviving droughts and coming back. So these plants have learned to survive under water conditions that they may encounter. Just a quick slide of my particular lawn this past week. I do not water my lawn probably ever. Occasionally I may feel sorry for it and provide some water. This is mostly tall fescue, but it also is a blend, a mix of some bluegrass in there as well. So just, I'm right there with everybody else trying to grow my plants. Another diagram I came across, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next couple slides, is that these root systems may grow down a little bit deeper into the soil, but the vast majority of our roots are up towards the surface where they can get that gas exchange, the carbon dioxide out of the soil, away from the roots, and oxygen back down in it. And so just a diagram of different plants and the percentages of roots towards the surface. And so just to be aware of that. And so if we're understanding the concept that the roots are going to take up the water and the nutrients and the oxygen, you know, where are those roots located for us to water and take care of them? We know there's lots of research out there on roots. And so soilandhealth.org website here, you may not be able to see this, but it just talks about the development of, in this case, watermelon, and how its roots develop over the season. And down here, as it's getting more mature, the majority of the roots are still at the 12-inch level, but there are some down 45 inches into the soil. And so as you water whatever crop it is, just being aware of the root systems. And I don't know where you live particularly, but here in Riley County, Manhattan area, I generally don't ever water my watermelon. They come from an arid region and don't require a lot of excess water for my type of soil. And so most of my questions people have on watermelon are typically from, again, overwatering than underwatering some of our crops. But if you wanted to check out, if you had a particular plant, soilandhealth.org may be where you can go find out where the roots are. When do you water your plant? Well, whenever the plant needs it, I think would be the right answer for that. So typically, you know, we water maybe in the early morning or evening because it's cooler, the wind is not as strong typically, and we can get a more efficient, effective use of our water by applying it then. But if my plant is struggling in the heat of the day and it's not just a heat issue, I will go ahead and water at that time because I want my plant to do the best it can. And again, I talked about the bluegrass, but other plants may go into a dormant period during the heat and dryness. And so we can manage that if we need to by periodically applying at least some moisture to keep the plant going, but maybe not encouraging it to grow too much by a lot of water. Just depends on the situation and your goals and things like that. So Dr. Alan Stevens had this two-step process for watering, and his comment was how much? And you want to add enough water to fill the majority of the root zone. And so whenever I would give a plant to my mom or install a plant and for somebody else, the question was, how much water do I give that plant? And there's so many variables out there with the age of the plant, your soil conditions, the location, that I just kind of boiled it down to generally more than a cup of water, but less than 20 gallons per plant. So that's how much water you add. I don't know if that helps, but we do provide enough to get to the root zone, and or at least the majority of the root zone. So it may vary on how much you apply, but being part of that two-step process is you add enough to the root zone. So the second step is how often will you need to add that water. Again, that's going to depend on the maturity of your plant, you know, the type of plant it is, the location. But we know that the plant needs the process of allowing that gas exchange to the root zone. And so we got to get that carbon dioxide out of the soil, or it'll build up and the root cells will be damaged if not killed. And so how often? I say not every day. Of course, that depends if you're starting plants from seed. You may need to keep the bed moist. But before 2 weeks has passed, I think you should need to check your plants again and see how the soil conditions are and how it's doing. So again, we don't need to water every day, but after a couple of weeks, I think if we haven't had any natural rainfall, it'd be good to go in and check our soil to see how the process is going. So I've talked about the root zone and where are these, and I've kind of broke it down into 4 categories. So we have our either insufficient root plants like blueberries and rhododendrons, or just shallow rooted plants such as our turf and strawberries. You could throw onions in there if you wanted as well. So their roots may be down 3 to 8 inches that are actively accumulating water and taking in nutrients and the oxygen and things like that. I broke them into cool season plants. So those are down 18 to 24 inches, if you will. Warm season plants are going to go down a little deeper into the soil, 2 feet to 3 feet. And trees, as they mature, could have very deep resources, but again, a majority of them are going to be closer to the surface, but let's say 36 to 48 inches. So that's kind of our biggest majority of our roots throughout the soil profile. But we do know that most of them are at the soil surface, or that upper half of that root zone, or 75 to 80% of the roots. So you don't really concern as much with those deeper roots, but more towards the top. So we need to find out where those roots are and how much moisture is in there. And I like to use a moisture probe. And so I did find over the weekend my particular moisture probe that I first started off with. And my father-in-law actually made this device for me. And if you notice, it's 12 inches. So that's a nice depth. But as I've matured and aged, I guess, over time, I've gotten longer and longer probes so that that leaning over and stretching is not as required as much. And so just any metal rod or tire iron, this is actually a moisture probe designed for that process. And I do like a soil probe as well, so you can actually take a core sample out and check to see if it's moist if you want to. So all these probes are stuck into the ground, and the process is once you hit the hard pan, the dry area, you'll kind of come to a stop, and you can measure how deep that is. So if you're pushing that rod into the soil, let's say in your lawn, and you kind of get stopped after an inch or two, you know that soil is getting fairly dry and maybe time to irrigate. If it pushes down 12 inches or so, you can probably say, hey, I'm pretty good. I think the plants look fine, and just carry on and think about irrigating another time. So I really encourage you to have the right tool or a tool to be able to determine how the soil is doing on its moisture content. So we talked about how deep some of those roots are, but again, we want to concentrate on that upper part of the soil profile where the roots mainly are. And so again, our more shallow plants, turf, blueberries, strawberries, onions, 2 to 6 inches. If it's moist in that zone, we're doing really good. Our cool season plants, maybe 9 to 12 inches deep, and warm season, maybe 12 to 18 inches, and our trees, 12 to 24. I can't remember everything anymore like I did when I was younger, so I need kind of sound bites or nuggets to cling to. And so I highlighted the 12-inch range. So on most of our plants, if we're getting moisture down to 12 inches, that should be a really good profile of moisture for the plants to take up. And so that way I don't have to remember individually. But if everything goes about 12 inches deep, then I think we're doing a really good job. Should have a good, healthy plant coming out of that irrigation and or rain event. Just some common crops, you know, our cool season vegetables, what they are versus our warm season vegetables. So again, cool season, again, if you're getting it down 12 inches on either of these, you're probably doing really good. Don't have to get real specific on them. Probably can't see this very well, but it's just a listing of our cool season flowers as well, along with warm season flowers. So just put them in those two categories of warm season and cool season plants, whether it be vegetables, flowers, turf. We understand cool and warm season turf. Our woody plants can fall into that as well, but generally they're just going to make do and don't have to be as concerned about that. But again, you know, if we just use that sound bite of 12 inches moisture down 12 inches for all these different crops, we're doing pretty good. Excuse me. So there could be some different strategies that you're coming across with your irrigation practices. And so there's two of them, maintaining or in the growth strategy. And so, you know, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your plants, you may be in one or the other or both. And so if we're just trying to maintain our plants, we're going to want to kind of make those roots work for it a little bit, if you will. And it should be efficient use of water. So you're maybe not using as much water, so you have some cost savings involved there. And if we get into a drought, or I know some parts of Kansas that they have water restrictions, so that if we do come into more water restrictions than we're used to, these plants may be able to withstand those kind of conditions easier than some others. So the maintained growth strategy is just a, you know, maybe a water conservation type of strategy for our plants. But many of our plants, we may want to be in that increased growth stage. I think particularly of vegetables, this is kind of where you're always at. Your annuals, as you first get them going and want them to fill in, you may be in this strategy and then switch to more of a maintain strategy. And so, you have to determine what you're wanting to get out of your plants and what your goal you're trying to do. Problem with an increased growth strategy, if we do have a water restrictive issue of some kind, it's going to be harder on that plant to kind of quickly adjust to less water. But, that's something they'll have to manage with. So just maybe a picture. I like pictures to try and understand some of these concepts that, your maintained plants may not look quite as vigorous and lush and may not have as many insect and disease issues being in a lower stage of growth than maybe the increased growth, but yet those are attractive situations and plants are really appealing under those growth conditions. So I don't know if you know how much your water costs you when you're doing some irrigation. So this is what Manhattan water does cost. And so basically what we need to know is, let's just, for an example, we're going to apply that 1 inch of water and we're just going to put it on 1,000 square feet. It takes 620 gallons of water to fill that. And so that's a perfect situation. We know that in our irrigation systems, there's going to be some lost water. And so maybe about an 85% is what's considered a really good, effective irrigation system for, let's say, lawn situations. So if you happen to have a 5,000 square foot lawn, doing the math, you're going to use that 3,100 gallons of water. Our municipality does not sell it by the gallon, so they sell it in units of 750 gallons. And so down here, 750 gallons, and your first 2 units cost you $8.03. So if you have 1,500 gallons of water, that's what your water bill is, $8.03. But we need more water than that, so we're going to use some more units. And in Manhattan, it's $2.45 a unit. And we're kind of in a different situation where we have an abundance of water, and so it actually gets cheaper the more water you use. May limit conservation use of water, but that's the process or the policy at this particular time. And so if you're doing a 5,000 square foot lawn in Manhattan, Kansas, it costs you roughly $15.50. Let's think about a larger, maybe more common square footage lawn is, let's say, $20. Let's say if you're watering that once a week and there's 30 weeks that you're growing your grass, that's $600, I think, if I do the math right. And so you're spending $600 on water to maintain your lawn, assuming that you're not turning it off and letting nature help you out. We've had abundance of rain here in Manhattan recently, and there's no cause for watering the lawn, but yet every day you go by properties that have their irrigation system running, and so they're not getting any cost savings by turning that irrigation system off. But to each his own. But I think we can save some water and money by monitoring the rain and knowing when we need to add irrigation. So hopefully, what you really need to know is that 0.62. If you want to figure this out for your own municipality and call them up and find out how much water is and how it's sold, so you can come up with an answer for you locally. And that's available. So as a picture for me in the soil, what is going on? And so we have these hard components, the sand, silt, clay, I'll call it organic matter, the hard particles in the soil, but there's also room for water and air. And so, soils class, this would be the diagram that you would get to see, and kind of what we'd like to have, I guess. But let's say it's going to rain or you put your irrigation on, what you're going to do is force that air out and fill that pore space with more water. And so that's a good thing. I mean, naturally that occurs and has grown plants for a long time. So that will happen. And then as you wait throughout the week, it doesn't rain or you don't irrigate, that water is used either through the evaporation or transpired through the plant, and you get more airspace there in the soil. And I think that's a healthy situation. If you're looking to maximize that growth, that 25% water, 25% air is kind of the sweet spot, if you will, for plant roots and growth. And so you may put on a drip system or something where you add that amount of water every day that is utilized. And so that kind of speeds up the process. This is where we don't want to be, is where we have saturated soil or at field capacity. And you end up with no room for oxygen and root health. Another diagram that kind of says the same thing, but in a different way. We have our field capacity where excess water drains, but they can't hold anymore. You have your permanent wilting point where there's still water in the soil, but the roots probably won't be able to take it up. And so then we have our withdrawals every day of water being utilized by the plant or evaporation. And they talk about, at least in field production, I'm talking crops, we have this managed allowable deficit level that we will go to, and then we want to irrigate, make sure our plants are not stressed. If you're not aware of kind of the average amount of precipitation we get across at least the state of Kansas, southeast corner gets up to 45, 50 inches perhaps. And if you go to the far western edge of Kansas, you're only getting 13 to 18 inches of water. So depending on where you live may determine a little bit on the characteristics and the types of plants that you're growing. Just a little campaign, me being here in Riley County, and we get about 34 inches of moisture. It's interesting, northern Riley County gets a little bit less than southern Riley County, but if you want to move to a great place to grow plants, just come on into Manhattan and Riley County, and at least your water bill may be on average a little bit less, definitely, than if you're out west of us. So that information is available on the Mesonet there at K-State, and so you can either search or Google or use the QR code there and come up with this vast weather stations across Kansas. And so I pulled this up just today on the amount of rainfall they've had over the last 30 days at all these different weather stations that are available. I just went with the one kind of in the middle of Kansas, Lorain, I believe. And so they're up 1.5 inches for the last 30 days. So generally that's probably a good thing, as long as you don't have plants sitting in water in any compacted or low spots. But you can pull up how much moisture it's gotten, yesterday, 2 days ago, 7 days ago, up to a year ago, and kind of keep a running tally of how much moisture is being applied in that particular location. I don't know if it's kind of a guide. I don't know if it's an exact science by any means. If you look here at Riley County, we happen to have 3 different weather stations, and they're all different. And so they're all fairly close in Manhattan area. So Rocky Ford and the North Farm and out at Ashland Bottoms, I don't know if they're 10 miles away from each other, but so rain amounts can vary quite a bit. I suggest at least 2 rain gauges for your property, one in the front, one in the back, or what you think. It's kind of interesting, the weather distribution or the water distribution that we end up with. Lots of resources on this Mesonet site. Go on there and play around if you want. You'll get lots of interesting information. So again, I pulled up Lorain and did the weather for the last week. And so under here we have our air temperatures, humidity, but precipitation I was looking at. It matched up pretty good with that other page. So they've gotten 2 30 hundredths rain the last week. Soil temperatures are here as well, which is good for planting, knowing when to plant. Over here is this evapotranspiration calculator that they have. And so they're measuring how much moisture is being lost through plant tissue as well as the soil. And so they have two categories. We'll call it, one is grass. So if you're interested in your lawn and when to irrigate it, you could use these numbers if you want to. If you have a broadleaf type of plant, you may go with the alfalfa and determine how much moisture. So it looks like in this situation that the broadleafs are using more moisture than, say, the grass plants. And so, you know, if it lost an inch of evapotranspiration in that alfalfa, and we got 2 inches, you know, we're not working at a deficit, and so we don't need to irrigate this week. And we'll just have to see as time progresses when those numbers start to become relevant as far as irrigation. So I got on here a 65% ET, evapotranspiration. And so K-State does lots of research on turf grass, and they determined that you can, if you replace the amount of water loss up to 65% of this number over here, which currently is 85, you wouldn't notice it. Your grass would still be healthy. So what I'm saying is you don't have to replace it exactly with the amount lost per se. If you want to have some water savings, hopefully rain will come and help fill in that deficit. So you don't necessarily have to, if you lose a 85/100 inch of water, you don't necessarily have to put that back after that week's time, and still you wouldn't notice that much in your lawn. So these are just some tools that you can use to help gauge watering practices if you want to. I'll hark back to, if you put on an inch of water a week, whether it's from rainfall or your irrigation system, I think your plants will be pretty good and healthy, and you wouldn't notice any decline or any issues with them. Our soils take in water at different rates. And so if you have a sandy soil, you may be able to get 2 inches of water in per hour. So that's pretty good. I hear a lot of people, and maybe in my area, we have more of a clay soil, sometimes called gumbo. I've heard other names for these types of soils, but they don't take water in very quickly, but they also don't lose it very easily either. So it becomes a reservoir for plants. But a 1/4 inch of water is about what it can take in. So you have to be there irrigating for 4 hours to get that 1 inch. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody's irrigation system run for 4 hours. My soil happens to work in 3 hours time shifts. And so it can, in 3 hours, it can take that 1 inch. And if I put it on slow enough, that works fine. An issue I have is with these type of spray heads that are fairly common in landscape irrigation systems. They put out water at a pretty rapid rate, a 1/2 inch in 15 minutes. Definitely our silt and clay soils aren't going to be able to absorb that amount. So if you ran that for a 1/2 hour, you're going to get a lot of runoff, I think. And so that's not going to be efficient use of our water and effective either. And so those spray heads need to be cycled on and off to get that water, the amount of water you want into the soil when needed. I'm not going to show this video, but you may check with your extension office. It just shows the capacity of the soil taking in the water, and the sandy loam over here takes it in much faster than our clay loam soil. So 2 of the most useful tools for irrigating is using your senses, checking the plants, looking at them, and using some device to determine the moisture in the soil. I kind of do a check every time I come home from work and kind of look at some of my plants, and if something's kind of looking a little wilty, I go check it, see if it needs moisture, and apply water if needed. So in a lawn situation, you can see where the water may be needed. And so the areas that are darker, meaning the leaves are starting to roll up and reduce its surface area to conserve water. So this lawn's starting to show signs of would use some irrigation. The lighter areas is still under good moisture availability. Again, K-State Turf has done a lot of research, and so they know on tall fescue anyway, which many of us have, after 30 to 39 days of no water, no irrigation, no rain, it maintained an acceptable performance. Now, everybody may have different perceptions of what lawn should look like. But they also went with the study of leaving it there for 83 days without any moisture. It went dormant and conserved itself and came back without real injury or plant loss. So if you're into water conservation, don't be afraid to let your lawns go dormant. They should be okay. If you're really into tech gadgets, there's this Canopio. I don't know if that's how you say it, but there's an app that you can download to your phone. It's one I've tried. And basically what you do, go out there and it takes a picture of the canopy of the plant. And you want to do this as a baseline when it's really hydrated and know what the canopy may be. Let's say it's, I don't know, 95%. And so then if you go back out after a few days to see how it's changed, snap another picture and it'll give you another reading. And as that percentage goes down, you can determine when you think you should water. And once you've got that baseline, you can go out and snap and determine using your smartphone to see if you need to irrigate or not. So it kind of, enhances our eye if you don't want to use the off color of the lawn. Or I'd use this on my tomato plant, and seems to be a way of doing it if you want to try some technology that route. Lots of ways to apply water. And I encourage everybody to have 1 or 2 rain gauges. This is a picture of all the things I've tried over the years for different plants in different areas, and they all will work. They all need a little maintenance and a little know-how, but I think any of these work fine. It's just whatever works best for you. The nozzle is just kind of a temporary early season. Get something applied, but after that we need a better system for watering. Again, if you have a soaker hose, which is fairly common, we know that on these perforated tubing that more pressure and more water comes out of the front end. So if you loop it around and connect it so that the front and the back are both to the water source, you'll get a better distribution or even distribution of water on that. I kind of harp on these spray heads that put out water way too fast. And so this is a change out. It's called a multi-stream nozzle that you can put in. And what I like about it is it's kind of therapeutic, and it kind of makes these streams, if you will, and gets a larger droplet out there, slower application. It's going to take more than 15 minutes to get to 1/2 inch, but it's going to be more probably usable water into the plants that you're trying to irrigate. And as you see, there's some catch cans out there to make sure we're getting good distribution and maintaining our equipment, our irrigation equipment, so that you are maintaining distribution levels well. I give this presentation and people come up and say, "Oh, I have this clock. I don't know how it works for my in the ground system." And I say, there's 2 buttons you need to know. There's the run and the off. I don't know how else to explain this, but you come home, you use a door opener. It's probably in the garage, this device. And so you push the button to open the garage, you get in there. So if your plants are dry and need water, you turn this to on and let it run through its cycle. And just like closing the garage door, you turn it to off when you're done, and leave it off until you see that your plants need water again. Go out, probe the soil, and if it's looking like it needs water, turn it back on. Otherwise, they're just going to run all the time, probably. I know there are shut-off devices, but I've yet to find anybody using those or maybe functioning properly. Just like this morning, saw 2 irrigation systems running. We've had rain again, so just turn it off and turn it back on when you need to. I think it's a simple way of running a system like that. Again, if you're into technology and you're a hose dragger like myself, you can hook it up like this and turn it on and off with your phone if you want to. Again, water tools, use some of your senses. Hopefully everybody here's, more interested in their plants and like to get involved outside in the landscape and the plants. And so you're out there and you can check on them and use your senses that way. Rain barrel, just want to say it's a good way to water some of your plants, good water. So encourage use of rain barrels. Kind of wrapping up, summarizing their planting zones. Ariel talked about this last time on xeriscaping. Make your plants that need water in one location and your drier plants in another. Select water efficient plants. And generally speaking, the blue-gray leaf tissued plants can tolerate more drought conditions than some of the other ones. It's a holistic process. Improve your soil conditions prior to planting, keep competition of weeds down, use some mulch to shade, reduce that evaporation process. So wind breaks, slow down the wind. So in those hot, dry periods, wind blowing, that it's less water loss through the plants. And we talked about the root zone quite a bit. Last thing, if you like to take some notes or you're a record keeper, this is a system that I've come up with. I got different beds labeled and I can go out there and probe them. This is for a drip hose that puts out a gallon per hour. And so I know in my area, if I ran it for 4 hours under fairly dry conditions, probe down to 10 inches, did a really good job of wetting that soil. And so I can keep this as a reference, and every 4 hours, if I want to put it on a timer or go out and know when to go out and check to see when I need to turn my irrigation system off. Just a process I use. So I want to thank you for listening with me today, and hopefully you've got a better understanding or confidence in your irrigation practices. And again, I'm kind of leaning more towards to not when should I water, but when shouldn't I water, as at least at this time frame, we have lots of natural rainfall being distributed in my growing area, and want to make sure that we're using water the best we can. So thanks again. With that, I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was excellent. And we do have a few questions that have popped in through the Q&A. I know our moderators have been working through some of those, but sure. I believe Dennis is ready to go and ask some of those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. One of the questions was about moisture meters. Do you recommend those? How effective are they?
Well, all these tools can be helpful. You have to come up with a kind of a baseline or calibrate it for your situation and see how it's working. You know, those often come with a reference. If it's a 3, then you need to water or not. You know, that's just a generic average information and may not be appropriate all the time. And so like my smartphone canopy type of application, I think you kind of got to condition it for your particular plants and location.
Towards the end there, and I'm sorry I didn't catch it because I was answering other questions. Where can you get those water catch containers to check irrigation system effectiveness?
I'm sure, online you can find those at irrigation companies. We used to always say use a tuna can, all those things. They just need to be all the same size and diameter so you can measure the outcome of that water. So you can use your kitchen cups if you want to, if they're all matching size and anything to hold the water. Okay.
There are some discussions about the use of municipal water sources versus private well water. Is there any difference in those? And then what about water out of a swimming pool? Can that use before watering if you're cleaning out your pool?
All those are very variable, so there's not like a generic answer I can put on that. Typically here in Kansas, we have very alkaline irrigation, and so you're going to monitor your pH level for your healthy plants, or be using plants that tolerate that. And in the swimming pool, it depends. If you have a high concentration of chlorine and other chemicals in there, it's not going to be probably beneficial for your plants. So it really depends on what's, the residual that is in that water. And so I've emptied a hot tub, and it has chlorine water, and I put it on my plants kind of as a weed control. Didn't work. So in that case, my water was probably okay. But I mean, you can test it and see what your levels are, but generally speaking, we can't recommend pool water for watering our plants. And municipality water, I mean, that's what you got, so that's what you're going to use. And wells, I have a well as well, and the pH is high, and you just have to deal with those kind of irrigation methods.
On the drip hose, the soaker hoses, did you talk about the unevenness of the distribution of the water and how to correct that?
Yeah, we did. You just Y the front end and the back end together, and so that you get more water pressure throughout the whole tube.
Do you have any tips for how to get them to work better on hills, go over more rough terrain as opposed to flat? Is just pressure regulating probably the best answer?
Yeah, I'd switch to what we call a more commercial product, the inline emitters that are engineered to give you a pretty even run throughout a 300-foot span. And so you may just need to switch to more appropriate equipment, and I think you'll have better results that way. And that stuff lasts. I've used mine for 15 years. I still have it, still works. Haven't had the emitter clog. And there's ways to fix that as well. And so I would really invest. My dad taught me to use the best tools out there, because in a roundabout way, because we never had the best tools to start with. And so it was very aggravating. And so over the years, I've gone ahead and bought the right tool for the right project and made gardening fun for me. Okay, I think in the essence of time, I think we'll end, because it's 12:57. So I think we'll end there, Greg. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks Dennis and everybody else behind the scenes. It takes quite a few extension personnel to pull this off. So thanks to all them.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Greg. We didn't make it quite through all the questions today, but we're going to link several articles related to this topic that are going to be on the website. Once again, thank you for joining our K-State Garden Hour series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We're so glad that you could be here today to learn about effective irrigation. We have several interesting sessions coming up, so make sure to visit our website, which we're going to link again in the chat, to see all of the upcoming topics. This session was recorded and it's going to be posted on the website by tomorrow afternoon. After the webinar ends today, you are going to receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please take that survey. It is so important for us as we continue this programming effort. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us again at gardenhour@ksu.edu, and we'll send that through the chat as well. Thank you again. We hope that you continue to tune in on the first and third Wednesday of each month. Have a great week, everybody.